Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have a much requested rising star, rising middle-aged 31-year-old gym bro joining us, who I will introduce in 1 second. First, as always, wanted to thank our sponsors, Chessable.com. This interview will be out on New Year's Eve, so happy New Year's, first of all, whenever you're listening to this, even if it's years down the line. And if you do catch this shortly after it's released, Chessable has their entire catalog on sale, so good time to check out what they have to offer. And of course, if you decide to sign up for Chessable Pro, as always, use the link in the description. As for our guest this week, so he's become a chess Reddit star recently, putting on amazing results. He's got like Anish Giri tweeting about him, Fabiano Caruana talking about him on C-squared, but he's got even more accomplishments away from the chessboard. So he has a PhD from the University of Michigan with a focus on machine learning. He's an accomplished research scientist with over 1,800 citations. He's also an accomplished power lifter, as those of you watching on video can ascertain. He's described himself as an NM level power lifter. I think he might be underrating himself, but we'll get to that eventually. So I'm excited to welcome to the program GM-elect, recently earned the GM title, Mark Heimann. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much. Really glad to be here, Ben.
What an amazing story, Mark. So I'm just going to give a bit of context for listeners, because one thing is when I interview people like yourself who achieve the unusual as adults, people like to pick apart the cases, which I get. You know, so we're not saying Mark started chess as an adult and became a grandmaster. Mark was a very strong player, 2,400 USCF when he finished high school, but also a very accomplished researcher and took a lot of time away from chess, but came back with a vengeance. And not only did you earn the GM title at age 31 just weeks ago, but you only earned your first IM norm a few years ago, which is just shocking to me. So, Mark, if you don't mind, I think a good place to begin might be, was there a moment where you decided you were going to pursue these titles, or was it more, I'm just going to get back into chess?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, when I first got back into it, I had no idea what I was doing. I wasn't even seriously going for the IM title. So that happened at the end of 2022 when I started playing these tournaments and I got these IM norms, and then I realized, wait, I can actually get IM norms. But really, over the sequence of 3 tournaments I played at the end of 2022, I got those 3 IM norms. But even when I started, I just thought the first tournament might have just been a one-off. I still wasn't seriously considering the IM title. After I got the second IM norm, I thought, okay, maybe I can get the IM title. But, you know, even at the time, I was just like, well, the summit of my ambitions is the IM title. So maybe around, after I finished that at the end of 2022, the early 2023, all I basically decided was I like chess. I like playing in these big tournaments. I want to keep going. So I decided I would try for Grandmaster, but even then I honestly didn't think it was a realistic possibility. So it was only deeper into 2023, I think, that I thought that maybe I could actually realistically do it.
Yeah, and of course, as you've mentioned, and Mark's done a couple Q&As on Chess Reddit that I will link to. JJ Lang from US Chess also wrote about his recent accomplishments a bit. So was there a moment where you decided you were going to train for the GM title, or even as you started to have success, was it more just training to play?
Mostly it was I was just playing and trying to do as well as I could with that. I didn't put in a ton of training, like specifically saying, okay, I want to become a GM. This is why I'm doing it. It was more just like, as you said, kind of just training for chess itself.
It's a very pure mindset, and I'm sure some people who have been chasing hard for titles might be a little jealous of the success you've had. As I was mentioning before we recorded, my friend Gabe Pettish in Pittsburgh, where you and your brother, who's also a very accomplished player, are from, has mentioned that you were a very strong player growing up. As I mentioned, and as you've mentioned in your Reddit threads, you were, 2,400 USCF, 2,300-ish FIDE when you graduated high school. So my question, Mark, is, to the extent that you've made this leap, do you think you've actually gotten stronger, or do you think maybe there was just maybe some meat on the bone from unfinished business?
I definitely think I'm stronger than where I left off at the end of high school. As mentioned, I played a lot. I was pretty highly ranked for my age group all growing up. Toward the end of high school, I kind of tapered off, and I didn't play at all at the end of high school. I played pretty minimally even at the beginning of it. But I still got up to around 2,300 FIDE, 2,400 USCF. So like a FIDE Master, USCF Senior Master. I do think I've gotten a little bit stronger since then. I would say mainly psychologically and emotionally, just as growing up often helps one to do, as well as some technical improvement from, starting to learn modern engine influenced chess and openings. Not that I've done perfectly or by any regard. I'm sure we can talk about that later. So I think that there was some technical improvement for sure. I don't think that I just was like sitting on grandmaster strength by the time I, was in high school. But I think that there was maybe less overall technical improvement, especially because I played so little in my adult life prior to 2022 when I started going for these IM norms. I think that a lot of it just came from areas of improvement that are maybe not like specific to chess, but nonetheless do have a big influence on chess that, we can talk about.
Yeah, I actually hear that a decent amount from the accomplished, from the people who made breakthroughs, that it wasn't necessarily a chess strength jump, but a psychological adjustment or learning to play more practical. Could you elaborate, Mark, on what it is that you think changed for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, honestly, I think that in general, I've not been a very confident person, which I guess is maybe a little bit ironic because I'm like standing here in like a dude bro tank top that I wore to play against Fabi. A lot of people were like, "Oh wow, this guy must like really like think he's like the shit or something like that." When they were, part of my language, when they were watching the broadcast of my last round at the U.S. Masters, and it was mostly just as a joke. Actually, like I thought, a friend got me this chess themed tank top, and I thought it was kind of fun, so I thought I'd respect that gesture, and then B, just for the memes. But I'm not in general a really confident person, just overall, and especially as a kid, I think that was very true. So I think especially when I'd play against stronger players. Like if I would play against the Grandmaster, I would occasionally draw them, mostly lose to them, almost never beat them. And so I think that as I got older, not that I became like, a 100% confident in every way person overnight, far from it, but like I just maybe stopped caring a little bit what people think or what like the expectation would be in this situation, and just started like, I don't know, living my life, I guess. And to some extent, maybe even lifting weights, which is a hobby I got in, like helps me with that. Not that I'm gonna say like, lifting weights makes you a grandmaster, but it does just give me like, it just made me feel more confident, and overall made me realize that like I have a life outside of chess, which is just really freeing. So I think I just like played with a lot less pressure on me, I would say, and just a lot more confidence. I think that was, for me, that was a big factor. I remember the first time that my dad, who taught my brother and me to play chess, I have a twin brother. Apparently, first of all, I wasn't interested in learning the first time when we were like 5 or something. So he was teaching my brother. But when I did start learning, apparently I was an incredibly timid chess player. Like I would like defend against like threats that like weren't even threats. And I don't remember this. So I think that maybe that is in some ways sort of like my default chess personality can be to be very timid. So any extent to which I can overcome that, I think, really helps my chess play. And I think that just the process of growing up and discovering myself so much, like on and off the chessboard, played a big factor in that.
There's almost echoes of like when you hear Hikaru in interviews talk about how he's been able to maintain or possibly even exceed his strength in recent years, even though he's obviously in his mid-30s. But when he had all this Twitch success, he was able to either level up or maintain his level at the elite level. And he said it's because he literally doesn't care, to quote the meme. But he earnestly argues that the fact that he's able to play carefree made a difference. And it sounds like you, with all of the notoriety you've achieved in your academic work, and obviously 20s to 30s are a big period for maturation. It sounds like there's some similarities there potentially.
I've actually drawn the comparison to Hikaru many times. Obviously, not that I'm actually in a league chess-wise to be compared to Hikaru, but I've used that same example about Hikaru also talks like, I'm just a streamer, and I talk like, oh, I'm just a gym bro or whatever. Right. They're just a researcher, just a musician, just this or that. And to some extent, I think both Hikaru and I like kind of know that, as the kids say, we're capping, right? Like we're not actually, we do actually care. We might pretend that we don't, but we do. So sometimes I think it would be a mistake to say that, like, oh, I don't care about chess and that has freed me up. But there is some level, I think maybe just enough level of not caring that we can get by just saying chess doesn't, like the gameplay of chess and our results in this tournament or that tournament, like don't sort of define like who we are as a person, certainly. And I hope that's true for everyone. And they also don't even define like the primary sort of like output that we see about our lives. And again, I'm not saying that like, oh, if you like do care, like attach more weight to those results, that's inherently bad. But the point is, I think both of us have experienced that can be very freeing for us, and the amount that frees us up psychologically can counterbalance or maybe even outweigh any limits it might have to with regard to our age or how much we're able to devote to technical study of the game and such. So yeah, I do actually think that's a really good comparison.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, you've had these incredible results, most notably recently with 2,700-ish performances, both in Charlotte and St. Louis. But you also described in one of your Reddit threads, in your first GM norm, you got the chance to play Ivanchuk. So, and I'd love to hear that story because you told a bit of a story. But I'm also curious, like those moments, do you still maintain that sort of carefree composure, or are you like, oh my, I can't believe I'm playing this guy?
Well, that is a good question. I would say when I'm at my strongest psychologically, I do sort of maintain like this ability to both enjoy the moment, but also not to be like too caught up in it. So, for example, against Fabi, I honestly think both times I was in a psychologically really good place. Like, I was like, this is super cool. Like, I signed up for these 2 tournaments thinking that, like, it would be, like, a dream come true if even once I could play Fabi, let alone twice. And so I was certainly enjoying that moment. I was having fun, like, with my outfit and with who knows what else, and just with the game that we played, especially that first game. But I wasn't, like, I wasn't getting like super like, oh my goodness, like I'm playing this incredibly strong player, like I have to go into full on to panic mode. So I think when I'm at my best, I'm like that. Now there are times, admittedly, like where I do get nervous. I am like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. Like imposter syndrome starts to kick in. Like, wow, I'm just like a doofus who's just gonna start blundering left and right at any moment. And actually, last year in the U.S. Masters 2023. I actually also had a very good tournament. I was playing for a GM norm in the last round. I needed to win with black against GM Vasquez, who's like 25-70. It was a nightmare pairing. I recall I was so terrified, like I could like barely calculate, and needless to say, like got crushed. So there are times where I have found like that, like sort of the weight of that moment, the strength of my opponent or whatever does get to me. Like much as I try to say that I think that one of my overall I'm comparatively strong in that regard. But so, we're all human and it does happen. But yeah, so sometimes I'd say I am in that moment where I can sort of just like, live in the moment, but not like let it overwhelm me. And then, of course, sometimes, right, it gets to all of this. But it's funny, actually, because one of my good friends is playing Ivanchuk literally right now as the game's going, as this podcast is going at a tournament in Spain. So good luck to you, Edward, belatedly. You won't hear this till much later, but rooting for you.
Yeah, we're recording this on December 20th. And pulling on the thread of you playing Grandmaster Vasquez, was it? Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you actually felt like you maybe didn't put your best foot forward because you were a little nervous with a Grandmaster norm on the line. Was there a specific lesson that you extracted from that you were able to then bring to these clashes with the likes of Caruana?
Well, I recall that tournament, and so this is at the end of 2023, like I could tell I was getting better. I had one tournament where I was also playing for a GM norm in the last round, also lost. In 2024 is when I actually earned all my GM norms. So at this point, basically, I was starting to get to the point where I realized that I could do it. So there was like hope, but then also I hadn't actually done it, right? So there was all this like anxiety about like, I really want this. I think I can do it, but I haven't actually done it yet. So then I'm like, can I do it after all? And I think that was just a really tough spot to be in. So it was a lot freeing when I finally got a GM norm, in April this year at a tournament in Spain, because then I was like, okay, I can do it. Like sooner or later it will happen again. So I think in these 2 tournaments I just played, for example, when I started doing well, like I was able to be like, okay, this is great. Maybe I can get a GM norm. Don't get me wrong. I was very excited about that. But I was also like, if this doesn't happen, it will be another tournament. Like I just have to keep putting my name in the hat, and it will eventually the stars will align in one of these tournaments. But one of the things actually I'll say is the U.S. Masters in 2023, once I started doing well, I really got nervous in that tournament. So I started playing up in round 3. I pretty much just kept drawing against the Grandmasters, and then finally one of them tried to beat me and blundered, and I was able even to win one. So the point is I was doing well for most of the tournament, putting up good results game after game, but the pressure really got to me, and I didn't go to the gym at all, which is very rare for me during a chess tournament. Like I just couldn't bring myself to do pretty much anything other than like feed myself and like think about how the chess tournament was going. And I've tried to change that since. So for example, at the tournament in Spain, like it was a 6-day tournament. I went to the gym once, which is still less than I usually go, but I still tried to go. I was staying in an Airbnb, and one of my Airbnb mates, like, took me out the night before the last game, which I needed to draw to get the norm. Not that we like went out and like, got, partied super hard and like got me completely wrecked or anything like that, right? But the point is, I tried to do just enough to still stay in touch with the other things in my life that I value, and to like keep myself from getting 100% in my own head with chess. And even though I didn't necessarily do a ton, right, it wasn't like I was completely distracted doing everything else. And I have done that at other tournaments, and it has worked against me. I think that doing just enough to keep myself out of my head entirely has been really important for me in tournaments where I've done well.
And playing Fabiano, obviously that's on a different level. I mean, he never even plays in open tournaments except for these unusual circumstances where he needed the FIDE circuit points. And then for you to get to play him twice. So it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to try to keep myself grounded. It's another thing to friggin' play Fabiano on the top board. So did you have to do any sort of self-talk, or had you established your routine enough where it was all set by the time this occurred first in Charlotte?
Well, so I will say at both tournaments, I had the huge luxury that by the time I faced Fabiano, I basically clinched the GM norm, which is what I came for. I faced him in round 9, and with the win in round 8 against another strong Grandmaster Mahila and T-Pub, I knew that I mathematically clinched the norm. And then in St. Louis, I faced him in round 7, but I had such an incredible tournament. Once I knew that with the score I currently had, and with his average rating, which of course is so high, I knew that my average rating pretty much had clinched me the norm as well. So by that time, I just reminded myself that there was no pressure, right? I'd already done what I came to do, and I was at this point just here, like, to enjoy things. I did enjoy memeing around a little bit, like, I think like wearing the tank top was a fun step in Charlotte, like not because it was like an intimidation tactic of Fabi. Obviously, like, first of all, I would not use such tactics, and second of all, Fabi's obviously far too professional for that. So some people were saying that on the YouTube channel of the C Square podcast, and that wasn't the case. But it was more for myself, just to remind myself that, look, this is at this point just for fun. Also, I did try to remind myself. So I was talking with some of my friends because we were trying to figure out like how to prep for Fabi, which of course, you have like an hour to prep, and Fabi has like an encyclopedic opening knowledge. So it's not like we're going to come up with some like devastating novelty or something that's going to catch him completely off guard. But we're just trying to figure out what I was going to play. And one of them did send this really interesting quote. He was talking about this one grandmaster who drew Magnus Carlsen, and someone was like, hey, congratulations, you drew Magnus Carlsen, you're a legend for the day. But if you beat him, you would have been like a legend for a lifetime.
Smurden, I think. I interviewed him.
Yeah.
Smurden
So
from the
it was
Olympiad.
Smurden. Yeah. So that quote was very impactful on me. He said that before the first game at the U.S. Masters, and now that might have led me to make the fatal mistake in that game. But I do think that something about that, like I went into that game and I was like, look, obviously if Fabi offered me a draw 5 moves in, I would completely accept it, of course. But there was something in me that was like, look, let me play, like, and not just say that in any circumstance the best I could ever do is draw. That I was expecting to win, or of course I knew that would be an incredibly low probability event. But recall what I was saying about confidence, right? How I never used to be able to beat, rarely would draw, right, and usually lose even to just like, just ordinary grandmasters, I guess, for, like what I might become soon, to say nothing of Fabi, right? So the point is that in general, I was not a confident person. So for me to even be thinking about this and to say, I'm going to put that possibility of a third result in my mind, a third result in this case being the good result, I think for me that was a huge step, because that was the one that my past self never could have done.
That's amazing. And refresh my memory, Mark. So he talked on C Squared about your second encounter, which was in St. Louis. And for listeners, this isn't like a 2-week span, just totally surreal. And he, as he mentioned, he played the Taimanov against you. But refresh my memory. I mean, I remember following along and being amazed at your performance, but I don't remember the details of your first game in Charlotte with Fabiano.
Well, that first game was what we were talking about. I was playing white, and he played the Taimanov Sicilian against me.
Oh, that was the Taimanov.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So, and I chose a very gutsy line. Like, he basically sacrificed a pawn, but in return he gets the bishop pair. He gets a strong center where I've sort of ruined my pawn structure, and my king is a little bit unsafe. So he has a lot of compensation for it. But I do get this pawn, this outside pass pawn on the queen side that has the potential to wreck him in an endgame. So I played in a very combative way. It was approximately balanced for a while, like in this very dynamic way, of course. And then eventually he started to outplay me as 2800s have
Tend to do. Yeah.
but then he messed up the conversion because it was very tricky to figure out how the exact right way to break through, and even he was looking at it and afterwards, and some of the lines that you have to find are pretty difficult. And he saw a whole lot more than I did, to be honest. And they talked about it on the podcast. He's like,
Yeah.
I know this guy can't be calculating everything. It's like, but it was still like, Fabi said it was a little bit unnerving how quickly I was playing. I was mostly just trying to play quickly and intuitively because I knew that Fabi's, of course, legendary for his calculation, even compared to other players his level. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to out-calculate him. So not that I wasn't calculating anything, of course I was, but I was trying to stay a little bit up on the clock, and I was trying to put the pressure on him just because I knew he had pressure on him, right? He needed to win this tournament to qualify for the FIDE circuit, right? I had no pressure on me. As I said, I already did what I came for. So that was my game plan. And it started to work because then he messed up and he basically allowed me into a position where, again, it was still dynamically equal. I still had an extra pawn at the risk of having a very exposed king and having some active pieces, but now material was quite reduced. And at one point, I have to play one more accurate move. On the 34th move, I play queen f3, which essentially consolidates my centrally placed attacked knight, while also keeping my king safe at the risk of giving back my pawn. Pretty much everybody, the commentators live, Fabi after the game, and of course the engine, agrees that the game almost certainly burns out to a draw. Instead, I tried to hang on to the extra pawn because I couldn't find a tactical refutation. And as I said, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is my time to try to make it through the minefield and win. Well, that was, gallant, but it ended up being misguided, whereas I remained in the minefield and did not, in fact, emerge. But yeah, that's pretty much what happened in that game, right? And and then St. Louis, I was playing black that time. Again, I played ambitiously, tried to complicate things, but probably that time got a little bit too creative, and Fabi maintained an advantage throughout. I was able to reduce it for a while, but then just made some poor middle game decisions, and Fabi was able to exploit those to outplay me.
A lot to follow up on there.
Yeah,
fascinating stories. Number one, just to highlight my long ago interview with Grandmaster David Smurden about the Olympiad, he said something that really resonated with me to this day, relating to sort of what Mark's talking about, which was he was saying when he played Magnus and he played white, and as Mark said, like he may have had some chances to win, and it was a great achievement. He was like hero for the day when he drew, but if he won, that's something you can really tell your grandkids about to beat Magnus. But David, when I interviewed him, made the point that when you play someone, and I think this applies to playing people higher rated, even if they're not super GMs, what they want most of all is to control the game. They want to have their thumb on the scale, and ideally to be playing for two results, but to feel like they understand the narrative, and there's not these wild complications with the potential results swinging in all directions. And you could sense that when you hear Fabiano talk about your game with, especially as you say, your first one, where he just had this sense that he barely survived because you were able to maintain that mindset of just letting it flow. And to follow up on what you said, Mark, about managing time and playing quickly, I think that it's one thing to make the game plan. I'm going to play quickly against Caruana in order to, to make him feel some pressure, and because I'm not going to out-calculate him anyway. But it's another thing to actually do it. Was it hard for you to actually just pull the trigger and make the moves?
Well, again, like I said, I think that I was in a pretty psychologically good state. Like, I just felt like, first of all, emotionally stable and happy, and then mentally I was in kind of a flow state as well. So, it's easier than it would be under many other circumstances. I'm not saying it was, super easy, and I'm also certainly not saying that, I definitely took plenty of good things at the board as well, right? So it's not like, I just was blitzing out my moves in a devil-may-care fashion. But yes, I was consciously trying to maintain it. I was trying to stay somewhat up on the clock. How easy it was to play quickly.
And with Fabiano, it's also interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, you were born in 1993 and he's born in 1992. Obviously, he famously moved to Europe in his high school years, but was one of the top players in the country, as you were, as a Scholastic player. Do you remember him from those days?
Actually, I do. We actually played each other. Fabi actually had some recollection of this game. We played each other at the National Elementary School Championship, many, many years ago. I think I was in 4th grade and he was in 5th or something like that. And he beat me then. It was apparently another close game. He was also stronger than me then. It was another close game. Apparently, I recall after the game, he told me that I did have some way to draw. It was one of those games like I had a knight, he had an H pawn, but my knight was like in the corner, and eventually his H pawn was able to queen, but apparently my knight could have stopped it somehow. I forget the details, but anyway, so another interesting and hotly contested encounter all those years ago. That was shortly before, after that, not too long after that, he moved to Europe and started focusing on professional rather than scholastic chess accomplishments. But yeah, we did cross paths once back then.
That's funny. And these times that you played him, obviously these 2-a-day tournaments make it
Yeah.
tough, but did you get to do any post-mortem analysis?
With Fabi, not really. I exchanged just a couple comments with him after that first game at the U.S. Masters. Of course, the tournament was ending, and he had things to get to, including getting on his own interviews and stuff like that. At the St. Louis Masters, we didn't do a post-mortem analysis, but we talked about the game in a little bit more depth, and so that was pretty enjoyable. But yeah, certainly it is hard to write in these tournaments where you're either getting ready for another game in the evening, or in some cases you're off to interviews or whatever else needs to happen to conclude the tournament in that case.
And Mark, so you mentioned, of course, Fabiano obviously went on to become one of the elite chess pros in the world. You took a different path. You went to Washington University for undergrad before moving to Michigan for your PhD. And you've described in the Reddit threads how chess obviously went on the back burner. Even studying in St. Louis in university, you didn't compete that much. I'm curious, as one of the top players in the country for your age, was that a tough decision for you when you were 18?
Honestly, not really, and that was probably mostly just because of high school angst. I think somewhere in high school, I just became convinced that I was a loser nerd with no friends, and rightly or wrongly about that assessment, I definitely wrongly blamed that entirely on chess, and so I was kind of well, chess is just making me be this type of person that I don't like. So I actually kind of was actively turning my back on it for a little bit when I started college. Now, when I got to college, thankfully, I just felt a lot better about being a nerd in college. I went to school with a lot of other nerdy people, and also just in general, people accepted you for who you are and thought whatever you did was cool, which I thought was really great. So but I still had no plans to get back into chess, because then I was a freshman in college. I was college is so fun. There's all these things you can do, and I just was having great fun with that. So I wasn't necessarily intending to play chess at all. But then, the president of the WashU Chess Club, shout out to Jacob Zaks. He's been a great friend even to this day. He found out about my chess rating. He's like, okay, you have to play for our Pan Am's team, right? The Collegiate National Championship, which is a team event held between Christmas and New Year every year. And I was like, well, that sounds fun, sure. So I did enjoy doing that every year, but again, maybe more for the social and camaraderie aspect. I actually really like team tournaments. I wish for those of us who aren't good enough to make it to our country's Olympiad that there was more opportunity to play in such tournaments, because I quite enjoyed playing Pan Am's every year that I was eligible. And so I played minimally in college, but again, it was mostly just for that team aspect, because I was busy doing other things in college, and I don't think I missed chess so much because I was doing many other fun things. But in grad school, for example, I also played chess pretty minimally in tournaments, just a weekend tournament here or there. But I also, at some point, I forget exactly when, I did create a chess.com account and started playing online, and found myself playing more than I always proud to admit. So I guess I maybe never entirely stopped loving the game.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things I want to highlight. Number one, according to the Spotify/YouTube demographics, it's not predominantly high school people listening, but just in case anyone younger is listening, just want to stress what Mark highlighted about his high school experience is quite common, and just important to mention that things do get better.
They do.
If you're having a hard time in high school, if you don't feel like you found your people, I do think that often changes at college, and if not, certainly when you get more autonomy as an adult. And then tying it together with what you said about finding a role for chess in your life, you mentioned in one of the Reddit Q&As that you reached a point where now you're like, I get a few weeks of vacation per year, and I would rather spend those weeks playing in a competitive chess tournament than sipping a Mai Tai on the beach, which when you put it that way, I was like, I'm not sure if I wish I could say the same thing, but I'm not entirely
One of my chess professors, I don't know, I agree with that statement.
Yeah. So what is it what changed for you? You already mentioned you feel more free, but so are you enjoying the entire process, or are there moments of suffering when you play these grueling OTB games?
Oh, I mean, don't get me wrong, right? There are moments where the game frustrates me a lot, right? Sometimes, like, if I'm having, like, a really bad tournament, I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I just, like, took this time off work, like, boarded a flight overseas, right? Like, took all that time and money just to, like, hemorrhage rating points and, like, get, like, beaten up by, like, by children, like, less than half my age, right? Like,
Right.
so, we have those moments, right? Like, and I think, like, again, as I said, I think that even the sometimes I pride myself on being able to detach from the outcomes of specific games or tournaments fairly well. Like, of course, like I'm human, and I definitely feel this. And I recall that at the end of 2023, right after the U.S. Masters, which I mentioned, I did pretty well, and despite falling short of the GM norm. But 3 days later, I was in Barcelona. I was playing, or Greater Barcelona area, I was playing the El Llobregat, a big open tournament out there, and I had like my worst tournament to date in terms of rating. I lost to no fewer than like three teenagers who were, or one of them was even a preteen, who were underrated than me. They're all like IM strength now, and I lost like 18 points, which is like a massive result. I described to friends like I basically did like the opposite of a GM norm. Like I basically lost as much rating as I would have expected a GM norm. So that was a really discouraging moment. And like honestly, after that, like I needed like a couple months to like kind of like lick my wounds. I guess like I didn't really play any tournaments. Like I played like one small tune-up tournament. Then I was back to Spain. I guess in the words of Michael Scott for The Office, I'm ready to get hurt again. And thankfully that time I went back to Spain. I made a Grandmaster norm. But the point is like I had one of those tournaments where what does look like an outright disaster, and I was just like, man, screw this. Like. So yeah, it hasn't been all rosy, but overall, I think I have been able to have a good amount of fun with the process. And as described, I am kind of bad at taking real vacations. Like my family just didn't really do them that much growing up. So why not like feel like I'm, spending my free time, I guess, with a purpose.
So when you had
I
this,
reserve the right to go book myself a real vacation and go drink Mai Tais at a resort now. So
yeah, especially now, I think it's especially deserved in light of your
no,
grandmaster.
it's on my to do list. I will be figuring one out. But the point is, that's kind of been my mindset. Is that like, hey, like this is like a fun way to get myself to go have interesting life experiences, travel to new places, and like feel like I have like a purpose in doing it all.
Amazing. And so you described this setback where you needed a few months to recover. I think a lot of people experience that, they kind of psych themselves up for tournaments and then they don't go how they want. And then it's like you have to go through you feel like you have to go through the whole process all over again, unless you play again, as Grandmaster Fidel Corrales Heimann has recently advised, just play immediately before those thoughts get in your head. So when you did get back into it, was that hard? You said you kind of played like a feeler tournament warm up to get reacclimated.
Yeah, and I didn't do particularly great in that feeler tournament either. So, and actually, even at the start of the Spain tournament, my comeback tournament where I did eventually get a norm, like I had a really sketchy start to that tournament. Like I played down in the first 3 rounds with just the way the field was, and like I basically should have drawn game 2 as white. Like it was just drawn ending that eventually culminated me having to win rook and bishop versus rook, which is a theoretical draw. Shouldn't have even gotten to that point. I was lucky to get that point. That I was lucky to actually win the end game. Then like I was like completely getting crushed. It was like +5 for my opponent in round 3. I was playing at 2200. So like I basically never should have that should have been another disaster tournament by all rights. Thankfully it wasn't. I was able to make it through, but there was definitely some like, oh boy, we just have to like figure out how to do this again. And some thoughts like, oh great, it's like Spain just like a cursed country for me or something like that. So like, but I've had a few moments even in my, I guess comparatively short, all things considered, run for International Master to Grandmaster. Like, for example, actually before these 2 tournaments that I just played in that we're talking about right now, the last tournament I played in before that, other than, again, a small weekend tournament, was in Barcelona, and I also had a kind of another disaster there. I don't know what it is in Spain. I either make GM norms or I have utter disasters. There is no in between. And I also kind of like needed a couple months. Like this fall, I was like, again, I was up to many other things other than chess as well, and I think I kind of needed a little bit of a reset because I burned out hard at the end of summer.
Okay.
So I don't know. Yeah, I think Fidel might have a very good point there, right? There are some people who just need to keep staying active, right? And you can like sort of get yourself into a funk. I don't know. For me, sometimes I think this could be because a lot of times when I do badly, it's because my issues do stem from burnout. So I think for me, that's why resetting helps so much. But for other people, if your psychological issues stem from some other factor, then of course another solution might be more called for.
Yeah. And you've gotten a lot of questions on Reddit about your study routine. And You make it sound like it's fairly minimalist. Is that fair? Like, how
It
many hours a
honestly,
week are
yeah,
you putting in?
it honestly is. I honestly could not even count. It's a very small number. I'm kind of embarrassed to say how small
People are
it
gonna
is.
hate you.
People are gonna hate me, maybe. No, but actually, what I would say though is like, so first of all, I think that like, I mean, I certainly think to some extent, like some parts of my story are anomalous, shouldn't be repeated, and I would also certainly say that probably my results would be better if I studied more. So yeah, what I do first of all, honestly, in most of my chess study, like my chess career up to this point, even on the road to GM, like I have done very little formal study. Like I'll do the training session with a friend here or there, and most of it, but most of it's just like me just playing like brain rot speed chess online or something like that. And then during chess tournaments, of course, I'm like prepping hard for my opponents. So maybe a lot of the openings I learned are things that I tried to learn like half an hour before the game for my opponent in some previous tournament. And it shows because I definitely like make plenty of mistakes in the openings. So I know, but this tournament, like I was trying to do like a little bit better. Like I was trying to replace a little bit of like brain rot, like Instagram scrolling or chess online speed chess playing with like a little bit of chess puzzles instead. And not saying that I didn't spend plenty of brain rot Instagram scrolling or online speed chess time, but I did a little bit of puzzles. I did some opening work, like not enough to feel like confident in any one opening, but like, but overall, I still spent. I don't even know that I can measure the amount of time per week, but it probably averaged to like I don't know, like a small fraction of an hour, honestly. But like I would just try to fit it into my daily life, like just again, as I said, just replacing other things that I would just like mindlessly do with a little bit of chess study. And because I was doing a little bit of work as opposed to virtually none, I thought I would be in slightly better form than I usually am. I certainly could never have predicted in a million years the types of results that I have, and I don't think that the small amount of study I did at all explains them. But yeah, but I do think that like just like obviously if you can devote as much time as you can to chess, then like that's great. If you can devote more time than I did to chess, that's almost certainly ideal. But if for whatever reason I think that someone who's listening is like, well, I really love chess and I want to get better, but there's only so much I can do. Like I would say just like do what you can, and you might be surprised at how much you're able to do. I wouldn't say like, I always tell people just in general in life, like I think this all or nothing approach, like if I can't like devote like a ton of resources to this, then I'm just not going to do it. I think can just hold us back in so many ways. So I pretty much just tried to do what I can around all the other things that I have going on in my life, and I
I
guess the
think,
results over the course of my career have been enough.
yeah, I think that's really good advice. And you describe your blitz play as mindless, but is it really mindless? Like, are you one of these people who, when you play online blitz, are you focused or are you like, multitasking and listening to?
I mean, I definitely have very high variance in my blitz results, and that does depend a lot on just like how focused and engaged with the game I am. So there definitely I come with like, as we all do, right, where we're playing it in whatever context in our lives, like we come to it with like varying levels of intentionality. So there are definitely times where I'm just like autopiloting really stupid moves and then usually hemorrhaging rating. But I do think though, just in general, like being exposed to chess, like is maybe the most important thing. And I am Alexander Katz, who's like a peer of mine, and also another adult improver who I think is putting together a great story of his own. Has also said something similar. I think that like to some extent, maybe the most important factor to chess improvement is just like the volume of chess you expose yourself to. So I think that there is, to be fair, like a very big difference. And like if I never looked at a chessboard for like other than outside a tournament and still playing chess like online, like even if that's not formal training, that's still like kind of greasing my mental groove for chess and making me like carry out the movement of chess and solve problems in my games and stuff like that, even if very haphazardly as I'm just messing around. So yeah, I do think that and so that's why I would also echo that advice when I tell people like the single most important thing to get better at chess is to like expose yourself to chess. So
Yep.
like I think that in general there are probably more constructive ways to do it than just like playing endless 3 minute or worse yet like 1 minute or something like that chess. If you really want to be like take the most like sort of objective approach to it, but like if that's all that you can, right? So if you're like, look, if I allow myself to play 3 minute chess online and that gets me looking at chess for an hour a day, versus I tell myself the only way I'm going to look at chess is if I do puzzles, and I hate that so much that I can only do it for like 5 minutes before I give up, right? Like that hour a day playing Blitz is going to expose you to so much more chess than that's like 5 minutes of puzzles before you hate it, that I bet that the former will make you a better chess player. So I think that at the end of the day, like you should do, especially for all of us for whom this is not a job, right? And this is enjoyment, right? Like again, I'm not saying that there aren't times to like put on like your, to grow up, right, and put on your big human pants, right, and like, make yourself do the things that we don't like to do that make us better. But by and large, right, we should maintain that level of enjoyment that keeps us loving the game enough to be thinking about it at all, right? Like, so I think that just getting out there and doing chess as much as possible seems to be the way to go. First and foremost, right? Like beyond that, we can optimize, right? If you do have an insatiable appetite, right, you can optimize for maybe what is the most efficient use of those resources within chess. But just in general, I'd say if you aren't spending much time on chess, right, spending more time on chess is, I think, in any way is the best way forward.
Yeah, I quoted I am Willie Hendricks in my book. Quantity is the best quality, he said.
Correct. Yeah, that's a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And I wanted to follow up, Mark. One other thing you said on Reddit that I absolutely couldn't believe is you don't even have chess base. Like how do you make GM without having chess base?
One of my really good friends and roommate for several tournaments, Safal Bora, who actually also just made Grandmaster at the age of 26. We met at the University of Michigan, where he was an undergraduate and I was a graduate student at the time. But we were in Spain together. We went there for 2 tournaments, one of which was the tournament where I got my first GM norm. And he was like, how do you not have chess base? So he's also like blown away by this. He's like, you definitely have to be like the strongest player who doesn't have chess base. Yeah,
I was thinking that exact thought crossed my mind. Yeah.
I don't know. No, it's actually shocking. Like, I feel like for somebody who, sometimes I joke with friends that like I'm like a low tech person trapped in a high tech life.
Right.
Just like, I have like my PhD in computer science and stuff like that, but then like, and I love music, that's one of my other big hobbies, but like I don't really know anything like electronic music or anything like that. I like mostly play like acoustic, like folk inspired instruments, like very low tech, right? Like, and so, and I'm like, not always up to date, like all like the latest gadgets or whatever. Like, I have like, my Mac and my iPhone, but I don't have like all my other whatever, like things like that. And so, and even with chess, like, again, when I studied chess, again, as I said, maybe it's because I'm also just not the most disciplined studier, so I'm not engaged in that much study. But like usually, like my openings prep just consists of like me like pulling up a Lichess analysis board and like clicking around and seeing what the engine says. Like, and if I'm really feeling disciplined and organized, I'll like save that notes in like a Lichess study. No, but like one of I have another friend who's a grandmaster who is like, firstly he's telling me it was other like, cloud chess engine that he's using, and turns out that he was getting much more accurate assessments of the positions with that than with the very low depth stockfish that Lichess runs locally on my phone. But so I was like, okay, I guess there clearly is value to be added if I were to go that route. But I don't know. Yeah, again, it's just been kind of all ad hoc. And to be fair, I'll also say I think. It probably shows, like, I've definitely gotten, like, plenty of very bad opening results. So I'm not saying that, like, turning up your nose at chess base or similar products is the way to go. But if you want something you can just, like, have on your phone when you're walking down the street or you're on a plane and, you have nothing better to do with no Wi-Fi or something like that, right, then, having screwing around in Lichess analysis boards maybe can get you... I don't know, in the best cases, maybe it can get you to Grandmaster, or maybe not.
Yeah, I feel like there is some sort of embedded, like, Zen Parable that the answer is within you, it's not, the answer is not on chess base.
Yeah. No, it goes back to what I'm saying, right? Like, again, right, there's room for all these, like, better tools, for all these, like, more intelligent study regimens, right, or even more volume of time put into chess. Like, I definitely don't look at a chessboard as much as many people at my level do. But, so I'm not trying to deny that there's ways to improve this, but, right, but, like, if for whatever reason those things are just not options for you, or, they're just not possible fit in your life, like, I think we are just in a world these days where there just are so many tools, at hand to improve, and you can get shockingly far with, comparatively minimal setup with them. Actually, I guess maybe in general I'm pretty minimalist in my life. Sometimes in like the gym, people are like, oh, like what supplements do you take? I'm like, well, I take like protein powder, which is like really just like a food replacement. It's like, and like I take like creatine, which is like one of the other best research ones. But I don't even like buy like a real pre-workout. Like I'll take a caffeine pill because I guess I'm a degenerate before I heavy workouts. But yeah, so the point is like, I think sometimes in many areas of life, whether that be chess or working out or something like that, like, we can like sort of major in the minors, right? And you can like sort of spend like all this time like optimizing all these details. And don't get me wrong, like, you know, first of all, like, even if you want to like make it to the very pinnacle of, you know, what these pursuits have to offer, maybe at some level you have to do that. And also, second of all, if you genuinely enjoy getting into the weeds with all these details and extracting just as much juice as you possibly can from yourself, then great, more power to you. But I'm basically saying, like, what I would say to people is like, just like, don't put pressure on yourself to say that, like, unless I have every single tiny detail nailed down, right, and have maxed out like my resources that I've allocated to this activity in every way, that like, unless I've done all that, then, you know, I might as well just like, you know, sit on my ass and do nothing. Like, I think that's definitely not the way to go in my experience.
Really good advice. And so with music, is that something you started as a kid, or did you pick that up as an adult?
Well, I always took piano lessons growing up because my parents had this rule. They're like, you have to do something like artistic or creative until you're 18. And so I didn't really like it, but I did it because that was the rule and it seemed better than switching to something else. But suddenly, almost like overnight, somewhere in the middle of high school, I went from hating music to like, you know, getting really into piano, and then soon enough afterwards getting into like all these other weird musical instruments. So I kind of went like almost overnight from like hating music to like spending all my free time like buying, selling, researching, trading, learning how to play like all these like bizarre musical instruments. One of which Kristen Chirilla had to pronounce on the podcast in real time. So sorry to him for that.
What was it?
But the hammered dulcimer, yeah, that's one of my.
That's what your Reddit handle is related to.
Yeah, yes, that's what my Reddit handle is a reference to as well, Dr. Dulcimer. But yeah, also probably my favorite musical instrument at this point, just because it's so unique. But that's beside the point. Yeah, it's ironic, I guess. That's like, wow, like Mark is too nerdy, too much of a loser nerd, so can't do chess. Like, has to pivot to something definitely not nerdy, like learning how to play all these weird musical folk instruments. Like, so I don't know what I was thinking when I was like 16 or whatever, but the adolescent mind can be a funny one.
And with both your musical noodling around and your powerlifting, which probably one would not describe as noodling around, are there things you learn about chess through either of those pursuits?
So, a couple things. First of all, in some ways, well, chess and music are a little bit similar, but you know, I did both of them from a young age. Chess and powerlifting actually are a very interesting one to compare, not because they seem so opposite in many ways, but as I was saying in an interview at the St. Louis Masters, I think they actually are a little bit similar in the sense that they both have this very analytic aspect to them, because powerlifting kind of boils down to numbers, right? How much weight you're putting on the bar for how many reps, for like, you know, what you can rate the difficulty of the sets, right? So you think of a lot of quantitative metrics and then you try to see them improve over time. And it's, you know, of course, it's very different from chess. And although there's strategic thinking and problem solving, it's of very nature and arguably much less intense than what you would have to do in chess. But nonetheless, there are some aspects. What I would say the really interesting thing to think about has just been to compare about what it's looked like for me to improve in both sports, because you know, I've been describing in chess that honestly my study routine and stuff like that is not that disciplined. And of course, I've also played chess as a kid and have enjoyed some successes as a kid. Whereas I was not at all an athletic person growing up in the slightest, and I didn't darken the door of a weight room until I was 22 days before I graduated from college. So all the improvement in there has been as an adult. And for most of my career, actually, as a lifter, I have actually taken a very disciplined approach to, like, I've been trying to like precisely program out what I'm going to do and think about concretely about how that meets what I need to do to get stronger, right? So like I've tried to take like this very measured approach. Like I would like measure out what I ate and everything. Like I never had a coach, which I guess is kind of unusual at my level as a lifter. But I would try to like, you know, coach myself with like all the diligence that somebody who had a coach would, right? And like with a very formal structured training, like intelligently as much as I could, of course, designed program, which is, like, as I said, almost the exact opposite of what I do in chess. So, and I also think that I probably have much more talent, like as a chess player than as a powerlifter. Like, I definitely don't think I'm particularly genetically talented. As I can say, there are people who are far, far more genetically talented than I am, as you know, in the lifting and realm. But so, you know, and it was funny because for a lot of my adult life, I actually thought that powerlifting was starting to take over where my interests lay. And again, I thought as late as summer 2022, I thought that I was like going to retire from competitive chess. I thought I was done with it. Really, I only got into it because in 2022, in June 2022, there's a big chess tournament, the National Open in Las Vegas, right next door to the Powerlifting National Championship that year. Like that started right after my weight class was scheduled to lift, and I thought that was too funny to not do. But that was supposed to be a one-off event. I was going to do that event just for the memes, and then I was going to like call it quits on chess. And because I was like, okay, well, maybe nature, if it's like the nature versus nurture thing, right? Maybe chess I have some talent for, and powerlifting I don't, but I've worked at it really hard. And so I was like, okay, maybe like nurture has won out, right? And like and I will say this much: there's a whole big debate. I think a lot of feels like which is more important, like talent or grit, right, or hard work. And I will say that despite what I've said, I do think that hard work wins every time, right? And if nothing else has convinced me doing that, doing a PhD convinced me that. But I don't know. Now, of course, I see a place for both chess and lifting in my life. But I don't know. It has been interesting to just reflect on like powerlifting has just been that thing where it's just like I just like kind of like doggedly work at, right? And then chess has been something where again I took a longer period, and I've also been very consistent at powerlifting pretty much the whole kind of time that I've done it, right? Whereas in chess, as I mentioned, I took like kind of 10 years off from really being involved in the game in that much of a meaningful capacity, and then came back to it. So
yeah, powerlifting, it strikes me to the advice you gave about chess, where like it's better to do something not these exact words, but half-assed than to do no chess.
yeah.
Whereas powerlifting, it strikes me that probably when you practice, you kind of have to go to the maximum. Is that right?
Well, so I will say this much: I do actually echo some of my advice in powerlifting that I like tell people like, the program that's best for you is the program that you enjoy, right? So like if you like hate this style of training, like even if it's like sort of like makes a lot of sense on paper, then like it's probably just not going to get you great results if you're like not going to put very much intensity or even outright just skip the workouts just because you don't like them. So I do think that again, right, because powerlifting for most of us is also a hobby, right? I also stand by that. It should right, just for our own like enjoyment of our lives as humans, right? You should do what you enjoy, but then also just because putting into, as you said, right, being able to like it enough that you want to put like everything you can into it is, I think, the most important part of it. Powerlifting is different from chess in the sense that they're like literal like physiological constraints in terms of how much you can put into it, right? Like like if I wanted to, I could play like bullet for 10 hours straight, right? Like not that would necessarily be a very psychologically healthy decision, right? But whereas like I don't think I could continue like working out for like 10 hours straight or something like that, right? There would just be like some level like physical limits. And similar with competition, right? Like most people don't compete more than like a couple times a year just because it's like physiologically too demanding, right? That process of preparing yourself to handle like these incredibly heavy weights, which is of course very different from in chess, where some people can compete like in many tournaments a year. So I do want to say there are some, right? So the nature of like in terms of saying like more is better or something like that certainly has to look, what that looks like is different in powerlifting than in chess, right? Just because they're just different physical demands that sport puts on you. But there are some ways in which you should again figure out how you can put as much as your body can tolerate in. And so you should say like, hey, if this is the way that gets me amped to train, then I should run with that, right? Rather than try to run with what might be quote unquote optimal on paper.
Okay. And returning to chess, Mark, you said on Reddit you weren't sure what's next. You might take a month or two to decompress. Any update on if you'll keep going?
Well, yes. So I am signed up to play in the North American Open next week because I can't leave a good thing alone. No, it's because some of my friends are playing. So I roomed with two friends, Rishab and Adit, in Charlotte, and we had a great fun, and they're playing in Vegas, so we thought we'd run it back. Also, Las Vegas is very easy to get to from the Bay Area. And then also finally, with the FIDE ratings being updated monthly, this is hopefully my last chance to play on a rating of 2459, not 2508, like I will be slated to be next month. So I thought that I'd try to see, like, while I can hopefully gain a few more rating points for the wins and lose a few more rating points for the loss, fewer rating points for the loss. But I try to exploit that one more time. So yeah, it turns out that I couldn't leave well enough alone, I guess. So we'll see if I just like lose a bunch of rating now, right? Had I run and now it's time to come back to Earth. But I will try. I'm going to try this tournament. Beyond that, I don't really know. I think I will actually take some time to, first of all, just to enjoy things like that, and then also just to reconsider what I want my life in chess post earning the Grandmaster title to be. With that said, like I said in an interview at the St. Louis Masters, like I definitely don't think I'm done with chess. Like I absolutely have no intention of retiring, and I don't think I'm done even trying to improve. Like,
That's great.
yeah, Fabi was very complimentary in his interviews and thinks that like I have further to go in terms of like my playing level. And he acknowledged, of course, that he's judging from a small sample size of 2 tournaments where I also happen to be in great form for some reason. So it's but still having the likes of Fabi say, hey, I think this guy could get to mid 2500s, like maybe even higher, just at the level he's at now. Like it depends on with improvement in some areas, of course, is what he said. But I was like, look, I'm not putting myself to be 2550 or 2600 or whatever. Like I'm not like at this point, whatever I get is certainly just gravy, and I'm certainly not entitled to any further gains. But at least if the likes of Fabi are saying that you can do it, I don't think I would be deluded to think that I could try to get at least a little bit higher rated, try to see if I could score some big tournament wins or something like that. So I think I'm going to still set some goals for myself. I'm not going to put any pressure on them if myself on them. Like if I don't achieve them, like I've already achieved like something that I'd never dreamed could be possible. Until very recently. So at this point, we're just in Vegas terms, we're just playing with house money, right? Like,
yeah,
so,
well said.
but that's what I'll do. I do think I will play less overall. I will probably try to see if I was missing out by not being on resort sipping Mai Tais or whatever. So I will use some of my vacation time to play chess, but some of it to do other vacation-y things, I guess. So I might play less and try to pick tournaments that just like are like in cool travel locations that will be fun to travel, especially if they like pay me to go as a grandmaster or something. But we'll see. I haven't really decided. And then also I will definitely I really like getting to share chess with friends. Like, chess can be a very lonely game, and I think maybe that's one of the reasons I gravitated toward powerlifting, which is just more social and has a very supportive community. And chess, of course, you're kind of sitting for hours in silence in this individual competition. So to any extent that I've been able to study chess with friends or to, talk chess with friends or to go to tournaments with friends, I really welcome that. So I'll definitely be seeing if I can continue to travel and compete alongside friends as well. And, I have several friends who are also adults and are trying to support their grandmaster title. They have their own grandmaster aspirations, and we've all been supporting each other on theirs. And I guess I now crossed the finish line in that regard, but I will absolutely be cheering them on as they also try to cross their finish lines, hopefully in person in some cases of these tournaments.
That's awesome. Well, Mark, I don't know if you're okay on time. You're such a fascinating guy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I got a few more questions. Number one, we haven't even talked about your research. So your most cited paper is called Beyond Homophilia in Graph Neural Networks, Current Limitations and Effective Designs. Could you translate that?
Sure. Okay. So this work was actually led by one of my lab mates because I was trying to take up this problem during my PhD and couldn't figure it out. And then right before I finished my PhD, he took a risk and was able to figure it out. So props to my lab mate, Joan, for really leading this work. But essentially, so my work focuses around sort of learning from data that's structured as a graph or network, like a big social network like Facebook. And, sometimes we have these saying birds of a feather flock together. Maybe on Facebook, right? Maybe you make with friends with other people who kind of have common interests or things like that, right? That's this principle of homophilia, right? That you just tend to connect with other entities that are like you. And we see that in many real world networks. However, that's not always the case, right? There are some networks where you tend to connect to people who are not like you at all, right? Sometimes opposites attract, right? Is another proverbial saying we have, right? And so basically what that work was saying is hey, some of these fancy machine learning methods that we have are really tailored around this assumption that the networks observe this principle of homophilia, that birds of a feather flock together. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes there are networks in which opposites attract. And so we basically were saying, let's look at this class of techniques that people have been using to learn really effectively from graph or network structured data. And then we sort of said, hey, of these techniques that people have proposed, here are some that happen to work better in this heterophily setting. And we sort of gave some theoretical justifications for that. And then we showed how you could arrange those into you could basically cherry pick all these right techniques and put together into a model that would actually do really well in a network that's more governed by that opposites attract principle. So. Okay.
And hearing your approach to chess study, I'm guessing I know the answer to this, but with the sort of AI revolution, AlphaZero, et cetera, in chess, is there any overlap between your academic research and your professional career and any sort of the chess AI movement?
There is not. And yeah, people are asking about that. People are did you have some super incredible algorithm or something that is helping you come up with like really deep, devastating opening novelties. And no, I am not bright enough for that, unfortunately. So, but that was not to say I do think that there is some really great work that's being done at the intersection of AI and chess. There's a lot of techniques that are coming out that are, first of all, showing that we can achieve very strong levels of play with computers with like even more techniques beyond just what's being done by like, AlphaZero and the current Stockfish. And then there's even some that are saying, how can we extract concepts from these incredibly powerful chess engines and teach them to strong grandmasters? And so there's even room in interpreting that. And I think that has the potential for some, like, I kind of wished I had done that research, because that could have changed my own chess play as well as many others. Right? If we'd say, like, hey, how can we like learn from these engines some like superhuman concepts that we can then distill into ways that humans can understand? So there's one paper that was done by some researchers at Stanford in which they did that. I forget the details now, but yeah, there is exciting stuff coming out of AI that has implications for chess. Hitherto I have not been personally responsible for any of those developments, but I'll be following them with interest, and certainly I will be considering if I can get involved with them in any way.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, but you you collaborated with the Wonder Liang on something, right? Even though you're a bit older.
Yeah, we did have one paper we haven't published, and we might eventually try to do so as well. It's more just like a data science exploration of FIDE ratings, very similar to what had already been done last year by consultant Jeff Sonas, which inspired some of FIDE's most recent changes to the rating system.
Oh, cool.
But we were continuing to dig around that data set, and we found some further insights that at some point I think we look forward to sharing. So yeah, no, a wonder. And then my good friend Varun Krishnan, who Harvard graduate working at a machine learning startup, who is also an international master trying to become a grandmaster in his mid-20s. The three of us we were just messing around a little bit with that and don't have anything super official, but one of these days, hopefully we will. So that was quite a fun collaboration. Both of those two people are incredibly bright people on and off the chessboard, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, for sure. And is there anything you can tease from that research? We're always interested in how the rating system could be improved.
Well, one of the things that the Sonos report that influenced FIDE's findings showed is that oftentimes the underdog's probability of scoring an upset is underestimated, which is something that gives me confidence in tournaments like the ones that I was just playing in, where I was the underdog. Like in St. Louis, I was always the underdog. I played against 9 grandmasters with an average rating over 2,600, and I just realized, hey, like my expected value is positive from this, right? Like obviously I'm not the favorite. I'm expected to lose more often than to win. But like, given how many points I get from winning versus how many points I lose from losing, like I'm expected to gain rating. So it's always a big confidence booster for me when I can, play against higher rated players, knowing that in some ways, arguably the rating system is slightly rigged. Not rigged intentionally, but just like there's maybe a little bit of statistical bias in there. With that said, right, so that had already been a known finding, and FIDE was taking some steps to try to correct that, like compressing the rating, the range, bringing that minimum up to 400, allowing you to gain 0.8 points for a win, right, like, or 1.6 points, depending on your K factor, right? Basically saying that like, even if there's a huge rating gap, you still gain at least this minimal amount. Like they used to only allow you to do it once per tournament. Now I say you can do that any amount. So FIDE made some of these changes to correct it. We were looking at some of the data, admittedly still prior to these changes. We don't have the most recent data. We were also basically noting that there are some like age and regional differences as well. So surprise, like underrated kids are scary, right? And then like certain countries of the world as well, right? Like especially like where chess is especially fast growing. Also, you can find that their probability of scoring upsets is much higher, right? As a surprise, which probably comes as a surprise to very few people who play chess internationally at a competitive level. But yeah, we were just statistically confirming some of these factors I think a lot of chess players who compete internationally think about.
That's interesting. Yeah. And just to highlight one of the things Mark just said, like he's not saying he personally has positive expectation just for playing someone higher rated. He's saying we all do. Because of the skew in the rating system. So that is a good thing to tell yourself. Like I'm winning just by showing up,
actually 100% agreed, right? Especially for people like me. Like I said, I would historically struggle with confidence, maybe especially against higher rated players. So just like going in there and saying like, hey, like I don't have to write this off as like a guaranteed loss or something like that. Like sure, a loss is like, I'm not saying I have to be deluded and think that I'm definitely going to win, but I just have to say like, look, and even that I would say, like, hey, I could lose most of the time. But if I just say, hey, I'm going to keep putting myself out there enough, then, right, statistically speaking, I should expect to do well. So I think that just encourages should be an encouragement to just put yourself in like these growth situations where you test yourself against very strong players. And of course, the reverse is true, right? When you're playing against high-rated or lower-rated players, and you're the high-rated player, right? Obviously, like that can be a difficult challenge. And there, I just have to remind myself that like I try to tell myself the reverse. And I try not to dwell on the expectations as much, even though I realize it cuts both ways. And I try to tell myself, look, I just got to take care of business, right, and do what I'm expected to do. And so, right, so again, right, like I realize that you just have to. It is all about the stories you tell yourself, right? Like, obviously, I'm either the high-rated or the lower-rated player, and so whatever narrative I use myself in one situation could be used against me in the other one. Exactly, but it's just about what I can, it's just about what I can remind myself and make myself focus on to put myself in the best position.
Really good insight. And last question or topic, the topic of chess books came up in the Reddit thread. You said your dad gave you a bunch when you were a kid. Do you have a favorite chess book?
That's a good question. So I would say, well, okay, that probably also depends on for chess, whether for improvement or just for fun of reading. I did enjoy reading Chess for Zebras by Jonathan Rowson, which is a little bit more like a philosophical book on chess, and just just had a lot of really interesting anecdotes that I found kind of just enjoyable and fun to read and think about. I think that Jakob Ugard has a lot of great resources and is one of my favorite chess writers, just in terms of like the quality of instructions that he provides. His book Excelling at Technical Chess, I think it's called. That was actually very humbling. Like I read that toward the end of high school when I was, again, I was like 2,300 FIDE, and I was at like, the peak of the strength that I got to as a kid. And I read that, and I felt like I was wrong about most of the things, and so that was quite humbling. With that said, I don't think that means that you have to be like above 2,300 FIDE to appreciate the book. I think anyone can appreciate the book. What I'm just definitely saying is that like if you're at that level or higher, at least in my experience, you can learn a lot from that book. So I think that. I think he's written several books that are really good, and that I really enjoyed even some of his opening books as well. But that's, I think, a really good book in terms of just allowing you to develop some of that positional play as well, and maybe helping to refine like your intuition as well as they're not just your raw calculation, but just like your ability to like assess positions and reason about that. That's, I think, a really good book in that regard.
Yeah, can't go wrong with Rowson or Agard. Great. Great recommendations, although they're both for fairly advanced players, we should say.
Correct. Yes, that is true. Yeah. So I was, for one that's maybe more intermediate, like I got a book, Understanding Pawn Play in Chess by Sam Shankland. He actually gave me a copy I played him in a Blitz tournament that he was holding as a charity for the Berkeley Chess School, and I beat him because anything can happen in one game of 3 minutes. And he gave me a copy of one of his books afterwards. He's like, yeah, you deserve it. And so, I read the book. And he pitched it for like 1,200 and up. So again, it's supposed to be accessible to a pretty wide range of strength. But like I still felt like I got stuff out of reading that book. And he said that multiple GMs have also told him that. So I actually think that, and I can confirm having read it, I think that's another book that is really great for a very wide range of skills. Because again, like I said, I think it's written so it's designed to be something that is accessible even if you're newer in your chess journey overall. But honestly, I don't think that until you get to a very advanced level that you'll like tap out of what you can learn from that book. So that's, and of course, pawn play is a very just fundamental strategic aspect of the game. So,
primary title I think is Small Steps to Giant Improvement, right?
Well, yeah, that's what it's called. That's the full title of it. Yeah. Small Steps to Giant Improvement.
Excellent. Well, Mark, absolutely amazing story. So inspiring. So congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you. And do you have like a favorite moment from your chess career? I mean, for me, I would think it occurred in the last few weeks, but it's obviously your question, not mine.
No, that's really a great question. Honestly, I mean, yeah, it probably has to be like maybe, I mean, yeah, maybe one of the two times I was playing Fabi just as I was like sort of just like living in that moment, I guess, and just like, again, like having just known that like, the hard part of what I'd come out to do is behind, like I achieved like everything I dreamed of. And then like I was just having this like moment that was just like, just like icing on the cake. But yeah, I remember even against like in the game before that against like Antipov, my 8th game, I won that game. I was playing black, and like I remember like I regard Antipov as an especially terrifying player, especially when he's white. Like I recall one other game he just absolutely crushed me from a very innocent looking position. He's just a master grinding out of this thing. So I was expecting a very difficult game, let alone to win it and to be able to clinch the norm around early. Because of course, sorry, like I usually I'm just like getting a norm at all would be incredible, and like let alone to be able to do it with a game to spare. Like I was like, save the tension of a last round, like must perform in this last round scenario. So I just like sat at the board like in disbelief. Like I almost got a little bit emotional at the board. So I think playing Fabio is in some ways a cooler moment than that, but just like that first time when I clinched a GM North round, like a game to spare, like was spared like that last game of like, all the nerves and stuff like that. And just like knew that I capped off like, incredible performance. Like I recall that was just like that was a lot to process.
Yeah, that's incredible. Long way from, as you described, basically only resuming your chess career on a whim, just happenstance that
Yeah.
that the tournament was in Las Vegas when you were there for powerlifting.
Yeah.
And last thing, I just wanted to mention Anish Giri's tweet, because this was one other thing in Mark's, 15 seconds of fame, taking a break from his fame in AI research to get some notoriety in the chess world. Anish Giri tweeted a couple weeks ago, watching the U.S. Opens, the tournaments in the U.S., two unrelated questions. A, where is Hans Niemann? And B, who is Mark A. Heimann? So
Yes.
now we know who Mark A. Heimann is, and we sort of know where Hans Niemann is, because he weighed in and said he was going to play in the World Rapid and Blitz. But
nice, yes. No, it's funny how similar our names are, so we have gotten that quite a bit.
That's funny. Okay. Well, Mark, again, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, and thanks for all the inspiration. Please, if you do manage to keep going as we want you to, do keep posting on Reddit as well.
All right. Yeah, I'll see what I can do. But thanks so much for having me on. Quite a pleasure. I love your podcast as well. So, happy to hope. I'm looking forward to seeing many, many other stories that you feature of adult improvers accomplishing many great things in this game.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I appreciate it, Mark. And do you want people to follow you on Instagram or no? Some people.
I mean, if you'd like to, you also get like a grid mix of like lifting videos and who knows what else. But yeah, I'm starting to slowly post more chess stuff on there and starting to make more chess friends on there. So maybe that'll encourage me to post more chess stuff on there. So yeah, my handle is at Last Good Caesar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll link to that as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Right. Thank you.